Hello, good evening, and welcome back. So, the Derek Chauvin George Floyd trial is currently in its last little stages. It's wrapping up, and so the BBC opted to put together this little 5 key moments in order to help you if you haven't been following it at all closely, just to know what's going on. And so, what I'm going to be doing today is going through these 5 key points for anybody who is simply relying on the BBC in order to try and provide greater context to what's gone on and hopefully correct the record. The first thing which they do mention at the end is that for a conviction to happen or for a sentencing to be handed down, even if it is not guilty, instead of guilty, depending on which charge they go for, it does require unanimous consent by the jurors. So everybody has to agree. Okay. And eventually the court will let out who was on jury duty, and also more likely that there would be a leak beforehand. One of the jury members were already asked about a possible book deal that they had going on. So that is vitally important, given that one of the expert witnesses already had I believe it was a horse's head sent to him. And if the jury are aware of this, and then coming on the back of Maxine Waters' statements of saying that unless there is a first degree murder charge, then we want you to do more rioting, as if the $2 billion worth of damage over the Summer of Love wasn't bad enough already. But knowing that, and knowing the jurors will be targeted, it's safe to assume that of course they would not want to put a target on their back by going with the not guilty verdict. So they might decide instead to have a hung jury and just not be able to make a decision because they're fearing for their own lives. Unless of course you've got people who will actually be standing up for their own convictions, but good luck with that. Seeing as there was footage shown of a chap who was trying to drive home and the road was blocked by the marching protesters, so he was trying to get around them, and of course they then confronted him and he had to stop, and then there was a bit of to and fro with the protesters, and then that chap got arrested for trying to go home. Anywho, with all that in mind, let's start bringing some greater context. So, the impact of arrest on witnesses. So they've got all their emotional pleas there to say, oh, well, you've got various people like here, Darnella, who was 17 at the time of Mr. Floyd's death. And you go, okay, it's terrible for people who witness this, sure. Hopefully, it's also the kind of thing to say, maybe you shouldn't be a criminal in the future. Wouldn't that be good? Maybe you shouldn't have a history of resisting arrest. Maybe you shouldn't be kicking the police officers when they're trying to help you in getting you to the floor which you requested because you didn't want to get in the police car, even though you should have of course got in the police car in order to enable you to get to the station. But by all means, if the police do come to try and investigate and they don't have a warrant, do not let them in, and you do not have to speak to the police either, and afterwards go through the legal proceedings like we're doing now. But in the immediate, the resisting arrest is the bit which you can't do, and you might think that is perhaps a flaw in the system, but nonetheless that is how it is set up. So either fight to change that or accept it and move on. Also, the testimonies given by the witnesses, as was proven a while ago in a psychological study, and then repeated, is that eyewitness testimony is very fallible, and therefore isn't that it's quite inadmissible in court. It's just not good enough to be reliable for a conviction. The video footage from it shows that witnesses were incorrect, but nonetheless, there we go, that's the first bit. And they also mention that the crowd had been very aggressive to the officers, including having to hold them back because otherwise there was a concern that escalation would happen with the crowd getting involved in the police handling of George Floyd. What does that mean? Well, it means that Derek Chauvin has to make sure he has a better control of the situation of the suspect, in which case he can't move from that position. From the what they call it, transitory position. It's supposed to transition into something. And what's that? Well, maybe for when the medics arrive, given that they were called when Floyd was saying that he ate too many drugs. And then, of course, you've got that Speedwell with his DNA found inside the police car. Right. Then you've got emotional testimony from the girlfriend. The girlfriend, who also, in George Floyd's phone, was called Mama. So when he was calling out for Mama in his last few minutes, was it actually his mother, or was it his girlfriend, who was also his drug addict partner? And she's saying, of course, we got addicted and really tried hard to break hard from that addiction many times. And as one of the defence's arguments had been, Floyd died largely because of complications from the opioids and methamphetamine he had in the system at the time of his arrest. Yes, as in 4 times the lethal limit. And then you've got the you got the lawyers for the family trying to say, one, that he's a model citizen, he's a stand-up guy, and then the other hand, he had a great tolerance to these drugs because he was using them a lot. So on one hand, apparently he was clean, and on the other, he had a high tolerance. Which is it? And then, of course, the admission that he was saying, I ate too many drugs. So again, it's probably that. Was force justified? So. Initially, he used his nightstick, as in Derek Chauvin, used his nightstick to knock on the window after they were called, because essentially the suspect, George Floyd here, used a counterfeit bill to purchase cigarettes. And then the shop owner came out and said, hey, this is counterfeit, just give me proper money. And Floyd resisted, denied, and things started to escalate, so the shop owner called the police. Right, fair enough. At that point, of course, the Derek Chauvin went to investigate, and yet again, as George Floyd has a history of doing, was not being compliant in showing his hands to the officers and was hiding them instead. So that's when Chauvin drew his gun about half a minute later, instead of what you might have seen, which is it straight away. Okay, cool. And then he was trying to get him into the police car, of course, which is where Derek Chauvin was saying that he couldn't breathe. Yes, as in when they were trying to get him into the car, long before he lay down. That is when he, of course, asked to lay down. He kicked the police officers anyway. You've got expert witness testimony saying that Derek Chauvin would have been justified to use his taser in this instance. So, was that force justified? Yes, of course it was. And then you've got, of course, I think it was Dr. Martin Tobin, I believe it was, saying, in terms of cause of death, here we go, that even a healthy person subjected to what Mr. Floyd was subjected to would have died. And, of course, in order to disprove this, then Stephen Crowder was subjected to exactly this for the same amount of time. And, believe it or not, Stephen Crowder is still alive. Stephen Crowder isn't the healthiest, as he has bones around his heart going into his heart, peculiar heart condition. A little bit different from what Floyd had of having a heart that was too large. His oxygen saturation was 98% though, so that's rather high for somebody who was supposed to have been choked out, because that wouldn't bloody be the case. But okay. And then you got disagreements on, of course, what killed him. In the footage, you can see Floyd lifting his head up off the ground, moving it around because he could still breathe, as in his airway was not resisted. This is the same restraint method used by the police department and has been used, I believe it was 237 times in the last couple of years without any incident whatsoever. So it was a thing which has even been shown in the police training handbooks. So it definitely was a common thing. So given all this context, and of course there's a bit more, but I'm just trying to rattle off comparatively to what the BBC have written here, I hope that does kind of make sense of things a bit more, in order to understand why there would be some deliberation from the jury, and then to understand the sentencing or the verdict that they decide on isn't necessarily what they actually believe to be true, but is simply in order to save themselves and trying to be the lesser of the evils, of course. But there you go. That is it. Oh, and in case you didn't get it, Derek Chauvin enacted the Fifth Amendment privilege and invoked it just to say that he didn't have to testify against himself. So basically, Derek Chauvin, the main man here, didn't have anything to say. And there you have the main defence chap as well. So there you go. Let me know what you guys think down below in terms of, if you have been watching this, if the defence did a good job or if the prosecution did instead, and then what you think the verdict will be given what we've gone over today. That will the jury just kowtow and say, yeah, he's guilty because they're afraid of themselves? Will he say he's guilty because they actually think that he is? Or hung jury, or not guilty? I'm intrigued to know what you guys think down below, given what you would have seen and heard from news as well as people that you've spoken to. So let me know down below. I was intrigued to hear what you have to say. And of course, as always, until next time, have a good one.